The Aston Martin V8 Vantage was supposed to be a financial disaster, but over the past year, depreciation has almost completely stopped. Something that almost never happens this early in the curve with modern Aston Martins. And that raises a surprising question. Has the V8 Vantage quietly become a real value-conscious alternative to a Porsche 911? Cars like the Porsche 911 build their status on strong performance and resale values. Aston Martins, though, are often more emotional purchases and are typically bought with the expectation that ownership would come at a significant financial cost. However, market data suggests that this assumption might not fully apply anymore to slightly older V8 Vantages. In this video, we'll look at what changed in the V8 Vantage market, how much depreciation has slowed, and how this compares to its competitors, in particular the 911. Let's get started. Now, the first 4-liter Vantage is not the latest iteration, but it's definitely not an old car. Unsurprisingly though, many people think it's still a money pit when it comes to depreciation. But when looking at actual pricing data, we can see that this couldn't be further from the truth. Over here we have the trends for the coupe and convertibles, excluding the AMR version. This shows that the coupes, which are on average 5 years old now, lost on average 3.2% during last year. The convertibles are slightly newer and lost 4%. These percentages amount to $2.8 and $5.1 thousand respectively. Let that sink in for a moment. Yes, initial depreciation was high, given that MSRP for a car with some options set between $180 and $190,000. However, the curve started to flatten relatively quickly, and this is rather unusual. Moreover, the curve behaves in a very predictable and stable way. This is not often considered, but a key point for value-conscious buyers. But that's not all. Things are getting even better for recent owners. If we break down the coupe's price trend by model year, we end up with a lot of lines. But focus on the two at the bottom. Do you see that? On average, they lost only 1.5%, meaning that prices were basically flat, as there is some randomness involved here. Now, the flattening that we're seeing here isn't limited to the first generation of the 4-liter model. The earlier 4.3 and 4.7 liter models show a remarkably similar trend. Prices have largely stabilized after years of decline. Look at that. Prices for the 4.7 liter increased by 8.1% during last year. This change isn't statistically confirmed, so it could be the result of chance. But it's clear that prices didn't decrease. There are different variations of the 4.7 liter variant, such as the Base, S, GT, GTS and N420. But supply for each individual variant is too low to look at them individually. The manuals of course demand a premium, but price changes are similar to those in the automatic market. Switching things to the 4.3 liter market, we can see that prices have been stable slightly longer. Last year they increased by 6.7%, but similar to the 4.7 liter market, the increase isn't statistically confirmed. The same restrictions regarding the different model types applies. Now, stabilizing prices alone don't make the Vantage automatically a good buy for value-conscious buyers. The real question is how the V8 Vantage behaves compared to its natural benchmark, the Porsche 911. At first glance, this looks exactly as you would expect. While 911 values remained relatively stable over the past few years, prices of the Aston Martin V8 Vantage fell dramatically. From its market peak, the V8 Vantage lost tens of thousands of dollars in value, reinforcing Aston Martin's long-standing reputation for heavy depreciation. But this is where the story becomes interesting. If we focus on the most recent period, something changes. The steep decline suddenly disappears. V8 Vantage prices stopped falling. 911s, on the other hand, saw some increased volatility following MSRP increases and a recent market turn. All of that completely changes the ownership equation. The gap between the median prices of the two cars is roughly $25,000 in favor of the V8 Vantage, thanks to its enormous depreciation. With a loss of 3.2% during last year, it lost slightly more than the Carrera, for which prices increased by 2.1%. Yet, as we saw in the previous Carrera market update video, that market is turning and depreciation is returning. Not convinced by the pricing data? Wait till you see the inventory data. The carried over inventory rate shows the percentage of cars that didn't sell within 3 months. The higher the number, the slower the cars are selling and vice versa. Of course, a brand new Vantage wasn't as hot as a brand new 911 Carrera, so Vantages were selling fairly slowly in 2022 at a rate of 40%, meaning that 40% of market supply was still for sale after 3 months. 911s though were selling like hotcakes and have been selling at approximately the same speed till February of this year, when the selling speed decreased. Now, contrary to the 911, the carried over inventory trend for Vantages decreased, meaning that they started to sell quicker, following increased scarcity levels. Decreasing numbers in the Vantage market and increasing numbers in the 911 market mean that for the last 2 months there's been hardly any difference between them, meaning that the V8 Vantage market is indeed significantly stronger than in 2022. Moreover, sellers had to discount Vantages quite a lot in the beginning. Discount percentages for unsold inventory dropped till an average of 7% and have been more negative than the ones for a 911 up until the end of 2024. But again, the situation changed. With exception of a spike in the 911 market caused by MSRP increases, discount rates are fairly similar, or at least clearly less distinctive than before. The story is somewhat similar for the 4.7-liter variation. Vantages experienced a similar correction after the pandemic price top, but the correction lasted a year longer and long-term performance is much weaker than for the 911. Yet, we can see now that prices turned, similar to what we saw before in the 991.1 and 997.2 market. The base 4.7-liter and 997.2 base market are relatively small, so we need to interpret the results with care. But we can see that Vantages are up by 12.2%, .2 base models by 5%, and .1 base models by 2.9%. These results put the Vantage on the same pace as the 911, let it be at a lower price point. Let's wrap up the comparison now with the 4.3-liter. Here you can see that prices behaved fairly similar since the beginning of 2024. Yet, the 997.1 increased a bit more during 2025. We're looking at 13.5% in the 997.1 market versus 6.6% for the Vantages. So V8 Vantages didn't outperform the 911. They did slightly worse, but the difference isn't as dramatic as it used to be. The 911 is an important reference point, but to really understand the latest numbers in the Vantage market, we need to take a step back and look at the broader market. Traditionally, Vantages underperform, but as we already saw in this video, the market changed. If we look at the year-over-year price change for the sports and supercar market, we can see that the market has been recovering since the pandemic price top, but recently started to show signs of weakness. The average year-over-year decline was minus 0.6%, and the confidence interval for the average lays between minus 2.5 and plus 0.6%. So this means that the 4-liter coupes decreased slightly more than the average, which makes sense given their newness. But the oldest coupes decreased more or less in line with the average. 4.3 and 4.7 liters are up by 6.7 and 8.1%, but these numbers were not confirmed. So even if we assume a flat development, they perform slightly better than the market average. Now when we put everything together, the conclusion is that a used V8 Vantage became a solid alternative to a 911, despite performing slightly weaker on basically all categories. Buying a new Aston Martin means that you choose emotion over logic, but no matter how much you desire one, it's difficult to stomach that immense depreciation. But the data we looked at today suggests that this relationship is changing for the used ones. The modern pre-facelift 4-liter V8 Vantage has already gone through its steepest depreciation phase far earlier than many expected, and show a consistent flattening trend. Older 4.3 and 4.7 liter cars have largely stabilized, and in some cases even show early signs of recovery. Now all of this isn't enough to state that a V8 Vantage is a more value-conscious choice than a 911. It doesn't beat the 911 on that dimension. However, buying these cars is never a rational decision. It's as much an emotional one. Now emotion might not be enough to overcome an almost 20% yearly loss on a brand new first generation 4-liter Vantage, but it sure can win against a few percentage points difference to a 911. The differences became so small that they're hardly relevant, especially if you really want that Aston. Remember though that this doesn't apply to the latest Vantages. They lost 14.3% during last year, and that's significantly more than a 911 Turbo. Now before we end the video, I quickly want to talk about the channel itself. If you've been following these market updates for a while, You may have noticed that videos can take quite a long time to release. And that's because behind every single chart that you see here is a huge amount of work that you don't see to ensure that results are reliable. Last year I already tried to streamline this work by reducing the uploading frequency from once a week to once every 2 weeks. This channel started as a hobby, and while this is still something I genuinely enjoy doing as a hobby, the level of analysis and data quality I want to deliver has reached a point where the current setup simply isn't sustainable anymore. So over the next 6 months I'll be taking a break from regular uploads. But this isn't a step back. It's a break to facilitate a big step forward. I'll work on many things that you as a viewer don't see, such as streamlining the back end of the channel. But also on something that many of you have been asking for, and I've been working on already for quite a while, making the data available to you. So I hope that when the videos return, you as viewers will as well. As always, thank you for watching, for the discussions in the comment section, and for being part of this journey so far.